Welcome, everyone, to our first panel, Curious About a Sustainable Future. And we have three people with us who are working at the heart of some of the future and some of the things that need to be done for our future. Jamais Cascio is recognized for his work in foresight, scenario planning, and futurism. He's contributed extensively to discussions around the future of the environment, technology, and society. He's senior fellow of the Institute for the Future in California, where he's worked on scenarios related to environment challenges, global risks, and the impact of emerging technologies on the future. His work often explores topics such as climate change, geopolitics, sustainability, and social change, in particular future scenarios. Jamais, welcome. And we appreciate it very early where you are. Thank you for joining us now. We have with us Marianna Marchesi, lecturer in sustainability and circular economics at Cardiff University. She focuses on sustainability, circular economic principles, and the integration of these concepts into business practices and policy development. Circular economics is a rapidly growing field aimed at reducing waste, improving resource efficiency, and creating sustainable business models. And her academic expertise includes exploring how systems and industries can transition from linear, as take and make and dispose, to circular, reducing, reusing, recycling practices, which aligns with global sustainability goals. She's specifically engaged with disseminating these and ways of getting these ideas into different scenarios. And finally, Jonathon Porritt, a well-known British environmentalist, author, and campaigner, been a prominent figure in advocating for sustainable development and environmental protection for many years, co-founded the environmental organization Forum for the Future in 1996, which focused on sustainable business practices and helping organizations transition to a more sustainable future. He's also a prolific author. He's written several influential books such as The World We Made and Capitalism as If the World Matters, and he frequently writes and speaks on these issues. The way it's going to work is I'm going to ask each of them to just lay out their stall for about 5 to 7 minutes each, and then we'll have a panel discussion and take some questions and have a conversation after that for the next 20 minutes or so. So without any more from me, Jamais, welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. I'm still waking up, but I have my coffee. I'm okay. Oh boy. Right now I'm at work on a book called Navigating the Age of Chaos. And it's about the Bonnie construct that I've been working on for a few years: brittle, anxious, nonlinear, and incomprehensible. It's a way of framing how we understand what's happening to our world. And it applies directly to what's happening with sustainability, and in particular, the global climate. Because we are at a balancing point where we know exactly what we need to do to make things better in the long run. We know what technologies we need, and we have most of them, if not all of them. We know what processes and policies we need to implement. We need to choose to act. And that is the big question: is will we choose as a civilization and as a culture to act? Because we're, again, this balancing point. We have a choice of going towards a future of sustainability, of resilience, of success, and a future of misery. Now, that's actually a really important word to me, because very often people who work in the field of environmental futurism end up feeling fairly despondent. I mean, nearly all of the futurists I know, especially those who focus on climate and the environment, are on antidepressants. This is not a fun topic, because it's very difficult to get people to change their behavior, even if you know what to do, if it's not in their immediate interest or in their immediate desires to do so. But it's not apocalyptic. We very often find ourselves veering into apocalyptic language, and I want to avoid that. Because one, that's not realistic, and two, it's unless we are all completely wiped out, which is really unlikely, barring an unexpected asteroid, we will continue as a people. And the question is, will our lives be something that we can embrace and enjoy, or will they be miserable? And So in my discussions with people, when I talk about climate, talk about sustainability, is really trying to pose that choice. The problem with misery, the problem with the potential for a miserable future, is that as it approaches, people get desperate, and desperate people do desperate things. I've actually done quite a bit of research and writing around the topic of thermal geoengineering, which is essentially putting some kind of reflection in the upper atmosphere to bounce back a small percentage of incoming sunlight to hold temperatures down. It's not a fix for climate change by any means. It's a tourniquet to stop the bleeding, and has the same kind of health benefits as a tourniquet. Keeps you alive, doesn't make you better. And nearly all of the geoengineering scientists that I have spoken with, and I have spoken with quite a few in person, nearly all of them really hate the idea of doing thermal geoengineering. They don't want to do it. They're afraid that we will be forced to do it out of desperation. And so when I talk about sustainability, when I think about sustainability in this bonny future of brittleness and anxiety and nonlinearity and incomprehensibility, what I'm thinking about is this tension between, can we do it because we know what to do? And can we, or are we stuck with a future of desperation and misery? And I really hate that that is even a possibility. But when you look at what's happening around temperatures and hysteretic lag of temperatures, if we stopped all carbon emissions right this very second, we would still see another decade of continued warming and centuries at this temperature. It's difficult to see that we can be willing to act, because so many of us have been doing this work. I've been doing this work for over 25 years. I was a co-founder of worldchanging.com back in 2003. So I've been deeply immersed in thinking about the future of the environment, of sustainability, of the climate for decades. And time and again, I have seen situations both in the environmental work and more broadly in my work in foresight and futurism, where recommendations are ignored, where good ideas are set onto a shelf and look, we have it on our shelf, we know what to do. I'm sure any of you out there who have done consulting work have had that same kind of experience, especially if you've done work with foresight scenarios or the climate. And it gets depressing. What I'm personally hoping to find in today's conversation are reasons not to be quite so depressed, because I think it is possible. And I keep coming back to that in all of my talks and all of the work that I do, is this is possible. This isn't a matter of wishful thinking. If it's hope, it's educated hope. But it's not something that is inevitable. We have to choose to act. And so that's where my brain is at this morning. You're muted.
Thank you, Jamais. Lots of food for thought. Let's hear from Marianna. Good morning, Marianna.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me. Great to be here. So I work in the intersection between academic research and teaching and real-world application to facilitate and develop innovation for sustainability and the circular economy in city and the built environment. So I'm an architect, a researcher, but also I'm teaching about this topic. So my focus is on sustainability and circular economy and designing for them. But I would like briefly to help to introduce the concept of circular economy, because we know is a hot topic. We know we are speaking a lot about this, sometimes it's very difficult also to understand what is it. So before explaining it, I would like to introduce a concept about, so sustainability is currently moving from a linear concept, from an approach focused on limiting damages to an approach focused on restoring and regenerating our social ecological system to flourish sustainably. So, like, to help understanding, let's think an example. We used to design sustainable building to reduce the negative impact that they have on the environment. So, for example, we used to design buildings to reduce their energy demand, as well as produce renewable energy to cover our energy demand. We designed them to reduce a negative impact. Now we are looking at designing buildings that are restorative and regenerative. So we would like to design buildings that have a positive impact on the environment and society. So what we are doing? We are designing, making, use building that can be used and recovered at the end of the service life, to avoid waste, to extend the service life of component and material as much as possible, and also regenerate natural system. In this type of approach, in this wish for a regenerative and restorative sustainability, circular economy fit as an approach in which we would like to move from a linear approach of taking, making, using, and disposing resources to an approach in which we take, make, use, and recover resources. So in a circular economy approach, material never become a waste. Nature is regenerated, and product and material are kept in use as much as possible through maintenance, reuse, refurbishment, remanufacturing, recycling, and composting, in order to avoid waste and to allow us to flourish sustainably. So in this, in a circular building is a building that is developed, used, and reused without unnecessary resource waste, without pollution and ecosystem degradation. It is built in an economic way for the well-being of people and the environment. Technical element can be disassembled and reused at the end of their lifetime. And biological element, bio-based material, can be composted. In my role, a difficult task is teaching about sustainability, is educating and also helping people to understand this complex topic, because it's interdisciplinary. Is an interdisciplinary topic, and because also traditional teaching method like lecture are proven not to be very effective in supporting understanding complex topic, as well as also they are limited in engaging students, but also the public. So in teaching sustainability, an effective method is experiential learning, in which you engage people in experiencing and acting. So sustainability education need interdisciplinary, need collaboration, require people to be able to link different topics, different disciplines, and it require bridging different type of discipline, gender, culture. So sustainability should educate for collaboration to sustainable transition, to a transition to sustainability. And
Thank
in
you.
this, sorry, yes.
Go on.
No, yes. So I found very effective using gamification. Maybe there is later the chance to speak about gamification is an innovative approach, but provide a safe space for people to learn, for people to be engaged and change attitude towards sustainability.
Thank you, Marianna. Appreciate that. Great. And our third panelist, Jonathon. Welcome.
Thanks. I think the good news for Jamais is that we're all entitled to some hope about prospects for a sustainable future for humankind. But most of the hope that people now look to is wholly ill-placed, premised on really very flaky assumptions indeed, and not justified at all. In fact, it's more to do with shiny optimism than real hope. And that's largely because we still don't really want to confront the reality about what sustainability is. Just very quickly, slightly boring to do definitions, but it is really quite important. If you think of it from the perspective of any species, sustainability is the capacity to sustain the life of that species indefinitely into the future. So from the point of view of the human species, sustainability is the capacity to live our lives on this planet as if we wanted to go on living here forever, which we decidedly don't seem to want to do at the moment. And sustainable development, which is a little bit different from sustainability, is the economic and political systems that we need to enable us to go on living on planet Earth indefinitely into the future. Very few people use sustainability in that way. They mostly see it as a synonym or alternative for the environment, and that is part of the massive problem that we face. In reality, of course, historically, although we've only been on this planet for a fairly short period of time, at least since the Industrial Revolution, we've been living in profoundly unsustainable ways, and many people rightly would take it back much further than that, to the origins of extractive colonialism, where European countries called themselves civilizations then, European countries set out essentially to find the raw materials to fuel a new kind of economy back in Europe, and in the process destroyed the livelihoods of the only people on this planet who ever really learnt to live sustainably in the true sense of the word, namely the indigenous peoples that they found in South America and North America and elsewhere. So we don't have any pretense at living sustainably at the moment. And of course, because of that, we have allowed our human numbers to grow. We're now at 8 billion, heading towards 10 billion. We've allowed the size of the economy to grow, and it does every year because everybody's obsessed with economic growth as the sole measure of progress on this planet. The consequence of which is to have left ourselves with very, very little time indeed. And if one follows the work of Johan Rockström, very eminent systems scientist who's looked at the boundary conditions, if you like, which would make it possible for human beings to go on living indefinitely on this planet, we've already breached 7 of the 9 boundary conditions that he identifies. Because things are now so bad, we are focused a lot more on climate change and indeed on biodiversity. We're beginning to realize that the process of climate change is going to be extraordinarily disruptive. And as Jamais said, we've already put enough heat, enough warming into the atmosphere to ensure that we go on seeing the effects of that for many, many centuries to come, regardless of whether we eliminated the use of all fossil fuels and all emissions into the atmosphere tomorrow. It would be much better than what we're doing now, but it wouldn't rescue us from centuries of continuous disruption. The likelihood of that continuous disruption making us miserable, to use Jamais' phrase, is very high at the moment. And that is extremely regrettable because we do indeed have pretty much all the technology that we need to enable even 8 billion people to live sustainably on this planet, which would be quite a stretch, as you can imagine. 10 billion will be even more of a stretch by definition. And we have all the money. There's a huge amount of money available to invest in these technologies for the future. But what we don't have is the political will to make that happen. And that is through a combination of different factors, which we may need to drill down into, because it is those political factors that actually make it impossible to be authentically hopeful about the future. Politicians are either ignorant about the current state of affairs, or willfully indifferent, or totally corrupt, as in sunk deep into yesterday's political realities, sunk deep into the fossil fuel incumbency, and so on. So this is all about the politics. It's all about the degree to which people will now seize opportunities that come our way, especially as climate change gets worse and worse, will come our way to break this deadlock. We could still do it. Chances of doing so diminish by the year.
Thank you, Jonathon. Those are three very powerful positions to set us off on. I'm going to ask us to have a conversation in terms of each. You've talked about the definition of sustainability and the difference between that and sustainable development. You've all talked about the need for education, and we've all talked about the need for action, about where we are at a critical point. You've also talked about policy and politics. My question, just to kick us off, is, having highlighted the need for education and the need for political change and so on, what is it that we can practically do? What needs to happen now? How do we communicate and educate in order to enable a sustainable and indefinite future, given that we have all the resources? What do we need to do? What do we need to do now? Let me start with Jamais.
Would it be too far to suggest the guillotine? No, it's very, given that I happen to live in the United States, I'm very conscious of the challenge of politics to achieve the kinds of long-term thinking that we so desperately need. All I can hope for here is for ground level work to continue, such that when the possibility of larger scale political change becomes possible again, and it will at some point, we have the ideas and connections available to us to move quickly. That's the dilemma, is that as you suggest, Garrick, this is not just a problem of of people not knowing what to do or not knowing how to act. There are strong political elements. Jonathon went into this deeply, that there are very strong political forces at work who actively resist and push back against the kinds of changes that need to be made, because it will cost them a few percentages off their billions of dollars of income. And if I sound frustrated, it's because I live in the United States right now, and it's I don't have a good answer for you, frankly, because so many of the pathways that I have up until until fairly recently seen as viable have been cut off here, and I am looking quite eagerly or desperately, depending on my mood, for a different path forward.
Thank you, Jamais. Marianna, what is your view on what we need to do now in terms of education and action?
I think it's we need a collective action, I think, and each of us has a sort of responsibility in this. I can say, I think I have the power to do something through research, try to understand what I can challenge that can be overcome, and recommendation that I can provide for politics, politician, or regulation to overcome this. And on the other side, I can support the public to understand concept about circular economy and sustainability and what they can do themselves, because we need an action that is a bottom-up and top-down action. We need that government at different level provide support and regulation for promoting action and supporting us to act, but also we need on the bottom action and engagement. So we need to understand what circular economy is, what we can do, but also not only because of the environmental benefit, but also because sustainability have an impact on society. So we can directly benefit from sustainability. And this is going to affect our needs that is not only also our affect also aspect about economics, about our opportunity to live. And so I think we need to move and collaborate towards sustainability.
So there's something also about top-down, and I will come to Jonathon about his view on the top-down. Well, also the bottom-up, you're saying there's need for agency and there's need for individual agency, that we need to act and educate to do so. We hear that very strongly. Jonathon, you down on politics. You heard what Jamais has to say. What's your view on what we need to do now that will shift the game?
I agree completely with what Jamais said about politics, and yep, the epicenter of today's chronic dysfunctionality is indeed the United States. But I suppose what I would urge people to do, if you imagine that we're part of something called the sustainability movement, which some people think they are and some people haven't thought of the idea, but just imagine for a moment that we all are, especially on a call like this. First thing we need to do is explode delusion. Stop people living in a fantasy land about what it is. And I'm very conscious that we've got a session coming after ours on what happens with corporates. Well, most of what corporates do or claim to want to do is very, very deluded, basically. So Simon invited us to challenge assumptions very quickly. 3 assumptions that have to be challenged. 1, the assumption that we are somehow apart from the life on Earth, and we're not. We are absolutely part of life on Earth. 2, the assumption that we're in control. We're not, as we're about to learn very, very painfully as the climate runs away with us. And 3, the assumption that the laws of the market are more powerful than the laws of nature and thermodynamics. Absolutely astonishing idiocy wrapped up in those 3 dominant assumptions at the heart of today's economic system.
What was the first assumption for me again? I got control, the assumption of control, the assumption of market laws are more powerful than natural laws.
The first assumption is that we somehow stand apart from the rest of life on Earth, that we are uniquely, as the human species, subject to none of the rules and conditions and norms that every other species is subject to.
We're outside of nature in some way. Interesting.
Indeed. Yeah.
We've talked about technology and all of these things, and I wanted to just explore that. Do you believe, is there hope? Given, we're all talking in a highly technological and probably highly expensive technology that allows us to be able to communicate around the world and be able to bring these forces to bear on certain topics like this. But there are other technologies that are so sophisticated. Marianna talked about the regenerative work that's going on in architecture and so on. But what about technologies like AI and blockchain? Do you think, you talked about us having the tools, Jonathon. Do you think we have the tools necessary to achieve these changes?
I do. And we have to start, obviously, with the decarbonization of the economy and getting rid of the use of all fossil fuels just as soon as we can. Beyond that, we then have to look at every other source of emissions into the atmosphere, and in particular that includes the carbon-intensive food and agriculture systems that we have on the planet today. We all know, we've talked about what those alternatives look like. I mean, we've written about them. We know precisely how we can do this. So we do have that technological potential, but it's only going to work if the policies change to make it possible to expedite those investments, that pattern of innovation, everything that Marianna is talking about there, which is so wise and so sensible and so, forgive me, Marianna, so bloody obvious on a finite planet that that's what we should be doing. And it must drive you completely mad with frustration that we still continue with what you call the linear economy. So, of course, there's pretty much nothing that we can't put right if we just had a generation of politicians who understood what it was that was necessary.
Thank you, Jonathon. Jamais, what's your view?
Well, I'm not a big fan of blockchain, just to set that one aside. I wrote about 20 years ago, I wrote something about the singularity is not a sustainability strategy. Basically counting on artificial intelligence and other kinds of hyper advanced technologies to save us is not going to work. That's not a wise strategy. That's playing the lottery every week, and making plans around your billions. If that happens, it's these tools, the tools like artificial intelligence and various kinds of networks and quantum encryption and all these kinds of really wonderful things could be helpful, but they're secondary. As Jonathon suggests, they are secondary by a long way to policy. And this is just a question of action. And I think that's what we're all coming down, just reiterating time and again here, both here and in our larger work, that action needs to be taken at a policy level, at a leadership level. And technologies may sometimes make that easier. Sometimes they might get in the way, but they're not, the technologies themselves are not the focus. The focus needs to be the actions that we take, the policies that we create, the goals that we have in mind, not just for our wallets, not just for our bank accounts, but for our planet.
I can't sum up everything we've talked about right now because this is only the start of the conversation, but the things that is really speaking to me and some of the questions that are coming through from the participants are how important politics are and how important policy making is, and how important having a relook at our economy is and what it is we reward in our economy, how we have to decouple from a carbon-based economy, what's that going to take, and how do we enable the policies to achieve it, and what is the action that has to be taken at an individual level and also in a collective way that can enable those shifts to happen. If there's one abiding thought that I want to explore further as we move on, is how can we do this collectively? What is the collective action that's required from ordinary people like you and me to make a difference and to enable the political will to be enabled? We've just been through COP29, which I think has been not a success by all accounts. And yet raised more questions about what is needed in order to make a shift that gives us a definable and sustainable future. Another thing that's come out really is our definition of sustainability is important, and the difference between that and sustainable development, and our understanding of what it means to create an opportunity for our species to survive indefinitely, and what that means for the changes that need to come forward, because change is not an option, and that seems to be clear. I'm learning a lot. I thank all of our panelists. Right now we'll have an opportunity again to speak as we go further, but I'm going to hand over to our next panel.